Hi, I'm Paul, and this is an excerpt of a longer video I recorded about Frankenstein the movie. That video is part of a longer course I offer at my school, clockworksacademy.com. If you like this short excerpt, check out the longer video and the whole course that goes with it. I want to start by talking a little bit about film and Frankenstein. One of the things that this movie does with Frankenstein's monster, and by the way, in the book you may have heard, actually Frankenstein is the scientist's name. In the book that's true, and there's complicated, I could go on about that, but in the movie, the creature is explicitly called Frankenstein.
Take care there, Frankenstein, take care.
That's also true, by the way, of the play upon which this movie is based. The play by Peggy Weber that this movie is based on is arguably the origin of the creature being called Frankenstein. It's the first time that the creature is explicitly named Frankenstein. So, I'm going to try to be clear and call the Frankenstein's monster when I'm talking about the monster, but if I call it Frankenstein, know that for the context of the movie, that's just as accurate as calling it Frankenstein's monster. So one of the other things that this movie introduces is the idea that the monster is stitched together. In the book, Frankenstein, who's telling the story, is very carefully and deliberately vague about exactly how he makes the monster. But it's pretty clear that in the book he does not just take, a hand, an arm, a foot, and stitch them together. He's like making it from the tendons and bones, like from that level. He's sculpting it together like clay. In the movie, it's explicitly stitches.
No blood, no decay. Just a few stitches.
Entire pieces stitched together. That is fitting for a movie because a movie itself is stitched together. And I mean that both literally, as in, not literally with stitches, but the way that film is put together into a movie is pieces of film are stuck next to each other. That's not true of how books are written. It's not true of how plays exist as pieces that were once separate that someone puts right next to each other so that it presents as if it's a whole. But it's definitely true of film. Pieces assembled in the order by the editor create the final film. Also, though, metaphorically, this film and films in general, but let's talk about this film, is stitched together. I mentioned a second ago that it's based on a play by Peggy Weber. So we have... And let's look at the credits. This movie is directed by James Whale, from a screenplay by Garrett Fort and Francis Edward Farrago. But their screenplay is based upon a composition by John L. Balderston. So Balderston wrote a story of Frankenstein that Garrett Fort and Francis Edwards Farrago adapted into the screenplay for this movie, that then James Whale adapted the screenplay into what we see on screen. And in fact, I said James Whale, but he's the director. But of course, Boris Karloff, Colin Clive, May Clark, John Bowles all adapted the screenplay and James Whale's direction into a performance. And then James Whale adapted the performance into a final product that we watch. And in terms of the creature, Boris Karloff plays the creature, but the creature is also created by makeup artist Jack Pierce. And arguably, the makeup on the creature is as significant as Boris Karloff's performance. Arguably even more so. I wouldn't say so. In fact, I would say once they start putting that makeup on other actors in the third sequel, the fourth Frankenstein movie, the creature's not as good with the same makeup but a different performer. But my point here is not to parse whose contribution is more significant and more important, but to say that what we get on screen is stitched together. Jack Pierce puts makeup on Boris Karloff, and the two of them spend hours talking about the characterization of the creature and how he should move and what he should be like. And then Boris Karloff gives a performance based on the script written by Farrago and Fort, based on the story written by John Balderson, based on the play written by
Peggy Webling,
based on the book written by Mary Shelley, which is then taken by James Whale and adapted into the movie that we see. And it is not unique by any means for this movie. This is the nature of film. It's stitched together. So it makes a lot of sense that whereas the creature in the novel, exactly how he's put together is not the point, and there's a very central sense in the novel of one genius is responsible for this creature who's a new thing. In the movie, Frankenstein stitches him together from parts, and the responsibility for creating him is diffused. So Henry Frankenstein says, I made him with my own two hands, but Fritz, as his assistant, helps him. Fritz is responsible for some of the central aspects of the creature, including his abnormal brain, and we'll get to that later. And then he has this audience while he's bringing the monster to life.
Quite a good scene, isn't it? One man crazy, three very sane spectators.
In the novel, Frankenstein is alone. It's important to the meaning of the novel that he's alone. But it's important that Henry Frankenstein is not alone. This isn't a sole creation. It's stitched together with collaborators and from parts, as film itself is. And when we talk about this as a movie that's stitched together, I haven't even talked about the influence. There have been a number of plays and movies of Frankenstein before this one, including one by Thomas Edison, actually. That is to say, produced by Thomas Edison, directed by J. Cyril Dawley. But the Edison Frankenstein isn't even my point. I said the screenplay to this movie is based on the play by Peggy Webber. It is equally inspired by and influenced by earlier plays. The very first play based on Frankenstein, the novel by Mary Shelley, was from 1823. It was called Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein, written by R.B. Peake. And R.B. Peake's play is the first appearance of Fritz, the assistant. So you can see, and other things too that I'm going to get to in a sec, but you can see that this movie, the Peggy Webber play, is lost. There are no copies findable. Maybe there may be by some people in the universe, but I couldn't, and every place I looked, other people said, we can't find this play, the literature on it. But I don't think Fritz is a character in her play. Fritz is a character in Presumption, but not in the play that this movie is supposedly based on.